Welcome back to another episode of the Piano Pedagogy podcast. With me here today is Molly McCann, the founder of henselpushers.org. How are you doing, Molly?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Jacqueline?
I'm doing a fantastic. I am so excited to talk to you today about one of my personal favorite composer, Fanny Hensel, and the project that you have going on over at henselpushers.org. So can you tell us a little bit about you and your musical background?
Yeah, of course. So I'm an amateur pianist. I studied piano really seriously from childhood through, I think when I started undergraduate, and got to undergraduate, didn't really like the culture of the music department that I was at. It was too competitive, and I preferred a much more supportive, collaborative environment. So I left. And kind of stopped doing music for a little while then, and then about 10 years later, came back to music as a pianist, starting playing again. And then I founded Hensel Pushers about 5 years ago now, almost 5 years ago, I continue to just be a enthused amateur. I like to perform in a limited way, but mostly to make my additions and do arrangements and collaborate with other artists.
That's awesome. So when did you start taking piano lessons?
I started taking piano lessons maybe when I was 7 years old, around there.
Gotcha. And you went all the way through to starting your undergrad, and then it wasn't for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I did other music too. I did several different choruses in high school and junior high, and played a handful of other instruments. You know, I wanted to be a conductor when I was in high school. So I took a little bit of viola, a little bit of trumpet, a little bit of saxophone, just tried to get a little, rounding in a bunch of different instruments. And I conducted my high school orchestra and did arranging for our orchestra. We had a really ragtag assortment of instruments, so we didn't have a lot that we could play easily. So I would take pieces and arrange them for our specific group. And that was really great education. I had a fantastic high school music teacher named Ike Jenkins. People in and around Santa Barbara, California will probably know him. And he encouraged me, he let me conduct the orchestra. He played double bass. He let me choose a lot of the stuff that we played. He let me arrange everything. He really gave me full range. And I had this fantastic experience doing that in high school. And then I think when college turned out to be something different from that, and I couldn't really just do kind of weird things that didn't fit the mold, I was like, I can do music on my own time.
Yeah, I think that there's a serious conversation to be had about the culture of collegiate piano programs and just what they encourage, and because I went from high school into community college to get a fine arts degree, and then I moved on to an undergraduate in piano pedagogy, and then I moved from that right into a master's degree in piano pedagogy, and I got about halfway through that first semester of my master's degree before dropping out because I was experiencing this overwhelming burnout of just being so tired of school and just the grind. And I've spoken about this before on the podcast. I didn't touch the piano recreationally for 2 years after I dropped out of my master's degree. I had just gotten this really unhealthy relationship with the piano because I had never really learned for me, right? I had never been encouraged to form a healthy relationship with the instrument. A piece by one of Fanny's pieces was actually the first piece that I started doing recreationally.
Which piece can I ask?
Melody number 3 from Opus 4 or Opus 5. I think it's Opus 4.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I used that piece to actually audition back into the graduate program, which I started last semester.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Have you found a better balance? What's the secret to, or is there a secret to managing to stay in it?
I think that taking time after an undergraduate degree is really important, because after an undergraduate degree, you've gone through potential, like if you start at the beginning at like kindergarten, you've gone through 20 years of piano, not piano, excuse me, of education, right? You've been a student for 20 years and you've never really been a person, right? Yeah. You've always been doing things for other people. So I never had a chance to form that healthy relationship with piano because I had always been under someone else's tutelage, right?
Yeah.
And so that gap I think really helped. I wish I mean it's sad. 2 years of not touching the instrument is just such a sad thing. But when I came back to it, it was different, and it is different now in my graduate studies. I'm doing more of the music that I'm interested in, rather than ticking off boxes to make sure that I have experience with certain types of repertoire. Not that that's not important, right? Especially as a piano teacher, knowing that I've experience with different types of pieces. But right now, I'm actually working through Daciar. I'm working through Daciar, and my recital at the end of my degree is going to be the whole cycle. I'm going to be performing the whole cycle.
Incredible.
I saw that you have
such a great piece.
It is. Oh my gosh. I could just talk about Daciar forever. It was actually was my introduction to Fanny Mendelssohn. Now I noticed your website is Hensel Pushers, and I always call her Fanny Mendelssohn. Can you talk a little bit about should we call her Fanny Mendelssohn? Should we call her Fanny Hensel? Should we call her Hensel Mendelssohn, Mendelssohn Hensel? What should we call her?
I mean, I'm not an authority on that. I don't think there's one correct answer. I think that I use different names in different situations for different audiences too. Hensel Pushers is mostly because it's a pun on pencil pushers, and it only worked with the name Hensel. But gotcha. I tend to use the name Hensel because, when she did publish, that's the name that she used. Her Opus 1 is Fanny Hensel, born Mendelssohn Bartholdy. So I didn't want to use the whole name, and she goes by Fanny Hensel. And being an F Mendelssohn is confusing because, of course, you've got Felix and Fanny. So generally, I use Hensel because it's less confusing between the Mendelssohn siblings. But also, I think, there's the issue of whether you're giving, the whole struggle, I think that persists around Fanny's music is having her be too much in Felix's shadow and being always talked about in terms of Felix. And I don't think that's inappropriate because they collaborated so much, and so much of their musical style they got from each other. But we never hear, not never, it's changing a little bit, but most of the time when you hear about Felix, you don't hear Fanny mentioned. So I think a lot of the scholarship around her seems to have used the name Hensel as I hate the term in her own right? But to give her a name and a musical legacy in her own right, to separate her from Felix a little bit. But I don't have a super strong opinion about what it should be. If I'm speaking to an audience that is not very familiar with classical music, maybe lightly familiar, I'll probably use Mendelssohn Hensel because the name Mendelssohn is pretty, recognizable to people who have a little bit, but not a lot of classical music familiarity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that I've always used Mendelssohn to elevate her in a certain way, to try to bring some sort of name recognition, even though if it is her brother's, it was both of their last names, but it's so strongly associated with Felix, and setting her with Hensel definitely separates her from the Mendelssohn baggage legacy. I don't know. It's a little complex. But when I first learned about her, this was in 2019. And
me too, actually.
A teacher at university for my undergrad, she changed everything, because she lectured for about 15 minutes in a romantic music history class about Fanny Mendelssohn. She played December for us from our anthology book, and I was just hooked. I was instantly hooked. And when I went online to find her music, I was so frustrated because your website didn't exist yet. Your website wasn't around yet. So there was just a couple really poor scans on IMSLP, and I found the Führer Verlag website from Germany, and I was just so frustrated about how difficult it was to get her music, having to special order something from Germany and then wait like 5 weeks for it to come and
pay twice as much because the shipping is so expensive.
Yeah, and then you pay tax in Germany, you pay tax here, and then it's a mess. So is that a similar experience? Did you find how inaccessible her music was?
Yeah. So I think so I had heard of Fanny Mendelssohn back in, my high school days, but back then, especially I graduated high school in 2002. So back then, especially, it was extremely hard. There wasn't even, streaming music. So it was hard to even listen to it, let alone get the sheet music. So, but I had heard of her and I had maybe heard one or two of her lieder and wasn't really impressed. I think part of that is because, what she ended up publishing was her really conservative, safe, polite little things, right? Which is kind of the opposite of what Das Jahr is, right? Das Jahr is a big kind of breaking all of the existing structures and expectations, really dramatic. And so that was a very different, and she of course did not publish that. She didn't share that with anyone other than a few family friends when she wrote Das Jahr. But so I had heard of her. And then it was also for me in 2019 that I heard mention of this cycle, this hour-long cycle about the months of the year, and that it was. I heard about it discussed with the respect that it deserves, and was like, wow, I need to find this. And yeah, same thing. Immediately was hooked on it. I was able to find that one on IMSLP. That was one of the few things that was on there at the time. And this was also right around. I had just been a couple years after getting really back into playing again. And I had been looking for a project for myself to really dive back in fully. So I decided in November of 2019 that I was going to do Das Jahr in the year 2020 and learn and perform each piece in that month of 2020.
Wow.
Which, it's a difficult piece. And I was working a lot on getting over my perfectionism and sharing things that weren't ready yet. So I knew that a month was not enough time for me to get each piece up to my really ridiculous standards for myself. So I just, learned it and played it in whatever condition it was in. And that was it was a boot camp for me, to do that. But, of course, 2020, we all ended up with a lot, more free time. And so I got more time to practice, and that allowed me to get a lot more into, I read the Todd biography of Fanny Hensel, which I think is, you've got it right there. I think that's, it's not the first biography of her, but I think it's the best because it combines both her story, her biography, and a lot of not super intense, but some analysis of her music.
Right. Yeah.
The previous biography, the first kind of modern biography was by Françoise Tillard, and it's originally in French. And that's a fantastic biography too, but there's none of the musical analysis in that. It's just the life stuff. So I read the Todd biography, and for me, the piece that really kicked off Hensel Pushers was I read about a piece called Das Nordlicht, the Northern Lights, that he mentions in that book. And I was like, the way it's described is this kind of really experimental, ethereal, it was written in, I forget what year it was, but there was some year where the Northern Lights were visible in Berlin. And so she was writing, this meditation on this phenomenon. I was like, I really need to find this piece. And I couldn't find it anywhere. Of course, that was an unfinished piece. So that's still not been published anywhere. But I emailed Larry Todd and I said, where can I find any of this? And he said, oh, well, they're all, all of her music is in the Berlin Staatsbibliothek, and most of it has been scanned. And I went there, and sure enough, 85, 90% of it had been scanned, but it's just photographs of her manuscripts, which are really messy and hard to read. And she didn't do a lot of like editing things to prepare it for publication. So they're really, really messy and hard to read. So I started creating PDFs at first just for myself so that I can read them at the piano more easily. And then I realized like other people are going to want these too. And I've just since then I think that I published my first set in maybe September of 2020. And I've just been doing it since then. Since then, I've finished all of her chamber music and her solo piano music. Tim Parker Langston over he's in the UK. He found me online. He had independently come up with the same idea to do all of her lieder. Almost half of everything she wrote was lieder. So he finished that not too long ago also. So now everything except for her choral works are available online as PDFs.
That's incredible. The Todd book, a friend, Kate, she bought it for me for Christmas, and I've been reading it. And it actually led to this episode because I'd found the references to the HU numbers that Todd references for each of those pieces. And that's from the Renate Helvig Unruh's catalog of her works. And I followed a couple of citations in the back of the book, and I ordered the book that was referenced that has from my university library, but we're on break right now. So I did some more digging, and it led me to your website. And I did a little bit of digging, and I realized that you had just, you had come online, in that 2020. So I had just missed you when I first did my looking in 2019 for information about her music and just her music in general. And I followed some of the stuff on your website, and not only did I see all of the, just the wonderful PDFs that you have, and they're very much in the style of like a Henley edition, right? An Urtext edition. They're not edited like, a lot of music is. And I love the changelog that you have when you describe what's being changed. It's very much in the spirit of one of those Urtext editions. But I also found the link to the Mendelssohn Archive in Berlin, and I was looking through some of her music. I've taught her B-flat Andante con espressione to several of my students, and I had no idea that most of the editions are very messy, because I guess that one is just very much not messy.
Yeah.
That one is just it's beautiful, right? It's very legible. It's beautifully prepared. I wonder why that one was that one published under an opus?
Which one was that? Do you have the HU number on that one?
I don't know. It's 100 something. I can pull it up on your handy website here. Solo piano. It is B flat major 314.
314. Okay, let me see. No, I think that was one. Let me see. I have everything in giant spreadsheets that are much messier on my end than what's published there. Let's see. I think I know. That was I think that edition she had copied out, maybe for Felix or for someone else. And that's why it looks so nice.
Gotcha.
Let me see it, because that one's let's see it. That one's like a darker, nicer penmanship and darker ink, right?
I think it's on manuscript 44.
Let me see. There it is, 414. Oh yeah. This is the only one that looks this nice.
So this is the only one that looks that way.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. This is. I mean, click on any other link on that in that notebook, and you'll see kind of what the other things look like. But this is not her handwriting. So I think this is probably something that she was going to give this as a gift to someone or show it off to someone, and probably had someone else copy it out.
I see.
Because most of her stuff is. This entire notebook is relatively clean. She must have been showing this one off to other people.
That is so interesting. So her handwriting is the one for the illustrated manuscript of Das Jahr. That's her handwriting.
Yeah. That's her handwriting, and you can tell in that one. They had prepared such a beautiful edition that she was really putting time into making it clean and legible, and that looks really nice. Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's really interesting that I happened to click on the only one that got that treatment from
Yeah.
her. But it was a very emotional experience for me looking through her notebooks and seeing what was written down in 200 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was very emotional for me because Fanny Mendelssohn was the first composer that I really connected with, right? And I remember when I was first reading about her in 2019, because I was preparing a position paper for one of my classes, and my position was that piano teachers have a responsibility to teach music written by underrepresented groups such as women and Black people, and all these underrepresented groups, because the classical canon is not set in stone; it is what we make it, right? So. I just found myself, as I read about her and her life, just so frustrated. I was torn between wanting to just scream in anger and just cry because of how sad all of it made me. The letters from her father saying, that she can never be what Felix is because she's a woman, even though she is just as good, if not better, at composing and performing, but she can't ever be anything, and just how crushing that must have been for her. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of a wake up call for me. And I was hungry. I was reading about everything, and I came across these articles and put together this cycle of exclusion. I shared that article with you about this power of omission. When someone presents a set of information, the person who's receiving that information, the student, will make the assumption they have been told everything there is that is important, right? Mm-hmm. Of course, things have been left out because you can't ever talk about everything. But if you list all of the great composers and none of them are women, you will naturally make the assumption there were no women composers, right? That they just did not exist. And I was really impressed that you knew about her from high school, because I never knew a woman who wrote for piano until I was 25 years old. And I had been taking lessons for 2 decades, 20 years of piano, and I had never heard about a woman writing in that time, right? And I made the assumption, as many people do, they were oppressed, they didn't have the same socioeconomical opportunities, so they just didn't do it. That was the assumption that I made. Do you think that that is a common experience for people?
Yeah, I absolutely think it is. And I mean, I knew I had to go. I went out of my way, I think, since I was a teenager to look for music by women. So I did have some, I had sheet music I had Cecile Chaminade, I had Amy Beach. I had Clara Schumann. Like I had kind of the few of the as close to the canon, as women get today. I knew about them and I had some of their music, but I had to really look for it. And I think the reason that I was able to get into that is because I had music teachers that really indulged me and let me do just pretty much whatever I wanted in terms of repertoire. And but yeah, I think a lot of people assume, when you're a learner and someone who has more information than you is telling you something, you assume, like you said, everything that is important, the most important things have been imparted, and you kind of make assumptions about the rest of it. I think that I have trouble with the canon, the existence of the canon at all. And I've been thinking recently about why, I guess, what that is and what the solution is to it, right? Because if you talk about music history, you do have to talk about figures in music history, around, and you have to give examples of music from different times and places in history. But I think that I just have a problem with the but I don't know what the solution is, right? I don't know what the answer is. There's too much talk of Beethoven, and Beethoven is great. Fanny Hensel absolutely loved Beethoven. I like Beethoven very much, right? But I think that there's I'm a teacher too. I don't teach music, but I have a degree in education and a lot of experience teaching a number of different things. But I struggle with this idea of how do you break free of these, because it's so entrenched in everything in society, right? Is we have this white male privilege. It is everywhere, but especially in classical music. And a lot of that is because of the history, like you said, because of the socioeconomic condition of everyone who wasn't a rich white man. I mean, Beethoven could compose because he had servants to do things for him, right? Like, even if you weren't super well off, like if you were, anyway. So I think it is. I think. And I don't want to make it sound, just because I was aware of women composers when I was younger, I don't think that meant I didn't have the same kind of indoctrination that we all do around who the great composers are and what they all have in common, even though that part is not explicit.
Yeah. I think the canon is a difficult concept, right? Mm-hmm. I think that it becomes a little less difficult when you think of it when you think of it more as something that you can impact, right? Mm-hmm. You have affected the classical canon, because a big part of that is the accessibility of music, right? Mm-hmm. Because a teacher is not going to teach something if it's not easy to get. Teachers are exhausted, I'm sure you know. Yeah. Teachers are exhausted. So if you can't easily get music, you're not going to go out of your way to teach that music unless you have an extraordinary emotional connection to that music, or you have a very strong belief about it. And even I have a strong belief about it. I have one book that I teach out of that has music written by women. The female classical composer. It has bios for like 8 or 9 different women, and then it has just the entire book is just about them. So it's got a lot of great music in there, and the B flat Andante con Espressione is in there. There's a lot of great stuff there. I'll link it in the show notes. But it's the canon is descriptive, not prescriptive, right? And I think if you think of it as something that's prescriptive, you say these are the composers that matter, and there we go. But instead, I think it's describing what it is. So because you've made that music more accessible, and because you're helping people, I mean, you've arranged Das Jahr into, from what I can tell from January, a pretty faithful rendition of the original solo works, but just in duet form. You've also arranged intermediate piano versions of Das Jahr. So you are doing incredible work to affect the classical canon, because without accessible music, no one will hear about these women, and no one is going to publish their music if no one knows about them, because no one's going to buy the music, because no one knows about them, but no one knows about them because the music's not accessible. And it's just this vicious cycle. So you're helping to break that cycle, and you're helping to influence the classical canon.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to break the cycle, and that's exactly it. That's what I realized. Coming across how limited her music was at the time, and also how a lot of her piano music is very technically difficult to play. It's not easy. She has a few pieces that are a little more approachable, but so many of her pieces are just advanced level, and emotionally challenging too. They're not something that you can approach lightly in most cases. So I think I recognize the same cycle that you're describing here, and realize that this cycle needs to break at some point. So that's why I decided, my goal with the site is just to make her music more accessible. And at first that was making it accessible by creating PDFs, making them free online, available to anyone who has the internet. So that was the first goal in making them accessible. But then I realized, this is still inaccessible for learners. And, you want, and it's ironic because a lot of pedagogical pieces, a lot of early, beginner pieces for piano are written by women, but the selling point is not the composer. The selling point is what you're going to learn pedagogically, what techniques you're going to learn or whatever. So women are already all over, easy piano music and, beginner, early intermediate, especially piano music. But again, that work is devalued, right? And there's obviously a relationship between those facts. But then at the same time, also you can find, a Chopin piece that's really difficult to play, you can find easy arrangements of just the theme of that Chopin piece that's, 30 seconds long so that a beginner can play it. And all of the great composers, I'm using air quotes, have that treatment, and very few women composers do. So that's why I started doing that I made an easy arrangement of Dacier, because I was so familiar with it from learning it in 2020. But I'm working on several more easy arrangements now, and trying to get, I'm doing a few of just her, like the themes in, she has a beautiful string quartet and piano trio, and there's beautiful themes in that, and just reducing, a 32 measure version of the themes from those. And then also from some other of her solo piano pieces, making them a little bit easier. So that's kind of the second front in making it more accessible for me. And then the third one, which I've started doing and I'm working on several more of now, is another result of the fact that she was a woman composer, was that almost all of her music is for solo piano or voice and piano. And that's because women did not have the same access to, even Fanny Mendelssohn, who is extremely wealthy, right, and had a lot of resources, did not have as much access to a full string orchestra or a full orchestra, right? So she did write one of each of the larger formats. She wrote one orchestral overture, which is fantastic. She wrote one string quartet, which is amazing. She wrote one piano trio, which is maybe my favorite piano trio ever. She wrote one piano quartet. So she kind of did one of each of these, like, standard forms of chamber music. And then almost all of the rest of her music is for, there are a few choral pieces, a few, part songs like voice duets, but pretty much all solo piano and voice and piano. And that excludes a lot of, she didn't write anything for winds. She didn't write anything for brass other than a few, there's some trumpet parts in there. So what I'm working on now is focusing on more arrangements of her pieces for other formats, so that instrumentalists beyond just pianists and singers can engage with her music too.
That's amazing. I want to touch on a couple things that you brought up. First, you brought up the difficulty of her music, right? And that's a problem not only with romantic music in general, right? Mm-hmm. Romantic music, they were all starting to flex their virtuosity, right? So they were all, and there was, for the composers who were performing, like Liszt, they were also in an arms race kind of with each other to attract ticket sales, right? Because the middle class for the first time was like buying tickets, and they were experiencing music, and they wanted to see cooler and cooler things, right? Mm-hmm. So I also wonder if, because a lot of the pieces that we have from these composers that are easier are either things that they've written when they were young, right? Mm-hmm. Or things that they wrote pedagogically, right? Or things that they intended for young women that were being kept busy in their, in their teens. They needed, that's the sonatina. The sonatina was invented to keep young women busy, right? So I wonder if that, she was writing music for herself, right? She performed bi-weekly, every other week, a couple times a month, she performed. So I wonder if that has something to do with it. The fact that she never expected her music to get published. She never expected her music to have an audience beyond what she could do. So why would she bother writing music that wasn't virtuosic, that didn't have that charged emotional connection? Do you think that there's a link between that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we know from letters of hers and the family and family friends, we know that she was an incredibly talented pianist. By most accounts, better than Felix. I mean, Felix wasn't known as a pianist, but she, Fanny Hensel was an extremely talented pianist. And yeah, she was most of her stuff. She would sit down and write, and then maybe play for family and friends occasionally, but mostly just for herself to play. Her husband was a painter, and they would have breakfast, and then she would play the piano while he would paint in the mornings. So she would compose and play for herself. And yeah, she didn't have other people playing her music very often, right? You alluded to the Sunday music gatherings that she had at her house, and she performed in those, but she was almost always the one who was performing her own music. So yeah, I think that she was playing for herself. And then she published in the last year of her life before she died, she started publishing. And I think she published 7 opuses before she died. And then the family pulled together a few more opuses after that and published, I think, another 4 after she died. But the pieces, when she did finally choose to publish, she chose her pretty, more normal pieces in terms of structure, and they're still beautiful. Like, people compare. People say there's a Mendelssohnian style because there is a similar, just beautiful lyricism between both Felix and Fanny's music. But what's absolutely not the same between the two is the structure, the harmonic structure, and just the form of these works, especially larger works between Fanny and Felix. I'm thinking specifically of her string quartet, which she sent to Felix, and he sent a letter back saying, like, you're breaking too many rules. Like, you're doing too much. That's not how we write a string quartet. So when she did publish things, she published the more safe things, right? She knew that there was an audience. She knew it could reflect poorly on Felix, right? So she published much safer things. So you have to go past her published opuses to get to the weirder stuff, the more virtuosic stuff. Although even some of her published opuses are technically challenging to play still.
Yeah, I mean, even some of the B flat Andante con espressione, I return to that because it's the one piece I've taught by her, and it is such a wonderful. It's etude-like in that it has this through line of this broken chord that split between the left hand and right hand, and just managing to get this wonderful sung melody through that dense texture, right? And it's all over Das Jahr. It's very much her thing. She loves. It's such a representation of that style of romantic music, of this melody that's just pierces through all of this other music, right? And all of this accompaniment stuff. I wanted to return to something else that you said about how women are responsible for a lot of the easy music, right? Women are overwhelmingly, before you get to college, women are overwhelmingly the teacher demographic. It's like 70% women, right? Out of the podcast listeners, it's like 70% women. So most of teachers are women. And then you get to college and it upsettingly flips, right? Then it flips, and it's really upsetting because pre-college, it is very much women dominated. And then you get to college and departments are headed by men, and, piano professors are male. And it's very much their perspective on a lot. I went through 2 semesters of piano literature, and he didn't teach a single woman composer in 2 semesters of piano literature. And he went with some real obscure stuff, right? He went with some really obscure things. He structured the class that, when we talked about sonatas, we talked about all of the people who wrote sonatas throughout history, right? When we talked about character pieces, we talked about everybody, etudes, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And he didn't see fit to include a single woman in any of that. And, so upsetting, first of all, because what a great opportunity to do that. What a great opportunity to stretch what's in the canon and open the minds of performers and teachers and students to just all of this stuff, right? You just include like a little bit, right? Definitely include all of your dead white guys, but then maybe some dead white women. Or some Black people, with ragtime. off topic here, but I wonder how much of that is just a holdover from the historical balance of things. Because women, if they were allowed a musical profession, it was teaching, right?
Yeah.
Amy Beach was forced into being a teacher, and she didn't really want to be a teacher, but she loved music so much that that's what she did. So do you think that but they weren't allowed to get college degrees, right? Yeah. They weren't allowed to get college degrees. They weren't allowed to matriculate. Like Fanny Mendelssohn, she sat in on some of the lectures that Felix graduated from, but she never got the degree. Do you think that flip in college, when it becomes a male-dominated field versus pre-college teachers, do you think that there's some historical oppression at work there?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it goes large. That's where we're stepping outside of just the world of classical music and just looking at society in general, right? It's the same way that, women's historical responsibilities of childcare and taking care of the home and because that still tends to fall on women, right? And it's devalued. It's women's labor is not recognized and compensated, and that's how it's always been. And going back to the idea that you were, when you brought up the article that you sent me, this idea of the things that you learn by omission, right? Is another thing that or things that you learn without being explicitly told, is that, women are there to help when you're still learning, when you don't really know what you're doing, when you're still a child. And it's more than it's their role, that it's their responsibility to help you and to guide you. But that as soon as you have, enough agency to be considered, a certain level of expert, or as soon as you are taken seriously, then the men take over, instructing you, and they're the actual experts that you learn from. And yeah, I think that's, that's always been the case. That's a bigger problem than, the same thing. Look at, the gender breakdown between elementary school teachers and then through K-12 and then to college, right? It's the same idea. And I think it's the sad thing about that is that, early childhood development is so important in every aspect of our development and growing into decent people. And the fact that teachers and daycare workers and that everyone who does that work is not valued, I think that's all tied in to this, because again, not because it's women, but it's there's a clearly a relationship between those facts. And I think, so Fanny Hensel is an interesting example here, because she did receive actually very good technical education in music alongside Felix, because her parents, her mother especially, and her mother's family loved music. They loved Bach very much. So they hired, I think it was Carl Friedrich Zelter was the composer they hired to come in, and he taught both Fanny and Felix in composition for several years. And then they studied with, I think, Marie Bigot in France. They studied, at least Fanny studied piano performance with her. So she got a fantastic education, and that, I think, because of the wealth and influence of the Mendelssohn family, they were able to provide their young children with such an amazing teacher, because they were very well off and because they valued music.
Yeah, I think that's you made some really great points, and she was given that education, which is so crucial. Reading through her bio and seeing how she would attempt a large scale work, and then her teacher would not engage with that, right? She wouldn't share it with her teacher, because she knew that she was outside of her lane. She was approaching something that had been marked as off limits to her. But her younger brother, who was I don't exactly know how much younger. I would say 3 to 5 years younger than
3.5 years, something like that.
Yeah, a little more than 3. Younger than she was, and I can't imagine how infuriating it must have been for a 12-year-old Fanny Mendelssohn to turn around and see Felix being able to approach these things that she wasn't. There was a specific anecdote that really a specific story that stuck out for me in the Todd, in the early part of the Todd bio, where regarding the songs without words. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The making up the words to the songs.
Yes, what an infuriating thing to discover that the songs and also just her idea. Well, let me fill in. So the songs without words are romantic pieces purportedly invented by Felix, and when he published them in 1828, that are lyrical in the same way that leader is, with singing, a singing line, but no words, right? So just the piano accompaniment, and then the piano is accompanying itself with the lyrical line. And I've always been taught that these are a Felix Mendelssohn invention, right? And that flies in the face of the fact that she called her pieces lieder. She called her piano pieces lieder, even though there was no voice to it. So that's basically the same thing, right? Like you're not calling it the songs without words, but you are calling them songs and there are no words. And then to discover that piano, just for the piano. And then to discover that she had this game with her younger brother where they would basically do the opposite. They would take piano pieces and add words to them. And I just, what a frustrating thing that must have been for Fanny Mendelssohn to not be credited with that.
Yeah, this is a hard one because I agree. I think that we now need to, when we look back on this form, the songs without words, we need to recognize that it was a creation. I think it's fair to say it was a creation of the Mendelssohn siblings. I think they did it together, right? They were so playful with their music. They had this game where they would write a song for piano and then they would come up with the poetry that would supposedly be the words to it. And of course, I don't think they would share that with anyone, or they would never write it in. But it sounds like they had such an idyllic early childhood in that they had, so many resources, and they had this just level of creative play that it's really the stuff of dreams. Like I dream to have that kind of life where you just spend your time creating things, sharing, with other creative people that you enjoy. And so they had this fantastic opportunity to create this. So I think that our role now, as we look back at history, is to recognize that this genre was created by the two of them together, at least, right? If not Fanny, but I don't think it. So much of their work was collaborative when they were kids that I'm not trying to tease apart who did what when they were both so young, because they really neither of them, until Felix left Berlin, neither of them would write something without the review of the other, right? So it was very, very collaborative. And I don't, Fanny, maybe because she had to be, just because she was a loving sister, she loved all of her siblings very much. She was the oldest of four, and Felix was the next oldest. She loved Felix, and she wanted all of the success for him, and he got that success. And she performed his music at her Berlin salons. He didn't really need the help because he was a pretty big deal in Leipzig, right? But she was endlessly supportive of him. But that was also because she had to be. She couldn't be focused on her own creativity in the same way. So I don't know. I don't know how she would feel about Felix getting credit for this, right? We know that six of the songs in Felix's opuses 8 and 9, which are each 12 songs, so 24 total. So 6 of those were written by Fanny Hensel. And sometimes people frame that as like, oh, well, Felix stole these songs and he tried to pass them off on his own. But that's also not quite nuanced enough. I mean, what it was is, her family knew how important this was to her. They knew how great a composer she was at this young age. And Felix said, "Oh, I have to publish these pieces. Can you send me a few, that you'd like to include?" And she chose a few, sent them to, he trusted her to choose which ones. She picked a few of hers and gave them to him. And then those were published under his name. It didn't say anywhere in the publication that she wrote them, but everyone in the family knew. I think family friends knew, right? This was really like the family's way of dealing with the fact that for societally, it wouldn't be okay according to them. And they were trying to fit into a specific delicate niche of Berlin high society. So they decided that they couldn't do this, but this was their way of including Fanny and trying to allow her, she did get her music published. That was one of those pieces was when Felix met the Queen of England, the piece that she said was her favorite of all of his compositions, and it was written by Fanny. Another one, was very well reviewed by the local, music critic, writing for the newspaper when it was, so this was a way to get her music out there and have it be appreciated. But it's a really complicated, delicate tightrope that the family kind of set up for themselves in this.
Right. And when I first learned about Fanny Mendelssohn, I was very angry. And reading letters like Abraham's letter about that she can't ever be, and I'm still angry about that she can't ever be what Felix is. But they also, as you said, they were trying to fit into this high society, and they had a very delicate tightrope to walk with their Jewish heritage.
Exactly.
Right? Jews were still not super appreciated at that time in history. So they had they didn't want to rock the boat. Right. They didn't want to stir up drama. They just wanted to fit in and with wealthy society. Right. They wanted to fit in with wealthy society, and they didn't want their daughter running around challenging gender norms as Jewish people. Right. So they had that aspect, and it is much more nuanced than my hot take 5 years ago was. But it sucks to read that Felix didn't encourage her to publish, right? That is still very sad, and that it only took, her husband was the most supportive man, and that's great. Good for her, right? She chose a good one. That her husband supported her, and it was his name. Hensel was they shared it obviously, but Hensel, she published under Hensel, and so it's glad to see that in the 30s and the 40s, 1830s, 1840s, that she was able to do that. But I think that was when she was a little bit removed from the family name and the baggage that came with them as Jewish people.
Yeah, I think I will. I forgive the family for a lot more. The thing that I do struggle with, that I still do get angry about, is the way that Felix, when he had the opportunity, did not support her more. And like, I love Felix's music. I think I love just reading their letters is so fun. This family is so funny and so loving and so fantastic. I love them very much. But like, there was this, I think the incident you're talking about is after Fanny's father died, Fanny was seriously considering publishing for the first time. So she would have been like early 30s at that time. And there was a letter that Fanny's mother wrote to Felix saying, she's like, look, clearly Fanny wants to publish, and why won't you support her? Like, I think it'd be a good thing for you to encourage her to do this. It's something she's very good at, something she wants to do. And Felix wrote a letter back that still kind of perplexes me. I wonder if there's more reasoning here that we'll never know. But he wrote something back to the effect, to his mother, saying, don't share this with Fanny, to the effect of, if she decides that she wants to publish, I will support her, but I'm not going to encourage her. And I don't know what that's about. Did he feel threatened? Did he think it would reflect poorly on him in some way? I really don't know. And unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever know. But and also, she felt kind of abandoned by Felix because he did get to go off and have this musical career. He got to go on tours, go to places she never got to go to. He was recognized for music in a way that she wasn't. So, and he did, he was a very busy man, and he probably worked himself to death, doing too much. But I feel like he could have, he called Fanny his teacher until they were, late in their teens, maybe early 20s, because he did look up to her like a teacher. She was his musical influence for a long time. And then he kind of, when he moved out and started his own career, he did kind of leave her behind a little bit. He still sent his compositions to her for her feedback and to hear what she thought of it, but he didn't kind of reciprocate as much. And that does still kind of bother me. But
yeah, I mean, it's challenging to grapple with the supportive relationship that they had, the symbiotic relationship that they had, which as he aged grew more unbalanced as he did the things that his older sister never was allowed to do, right? And your speculation about the reasons as to why he I mean, was it a saving face? He didn't want her to, but he couldn't tell her that if she wanted to, that he didn't support her. But it really wasn't something that he strongly believed in. We'll never know. But it's very perplexing. You mentioned earlier the influences that they had on each other, especially regarding the songs without words. When in college, some professors made assertions that looking at her music, and this is something that Todd brings up, that so many people analyze her music as a one-way street of influence flowing from Felix to Fanny. And they're like, this is like what he did here. And, you brought up on your website for that B flat, Andante con espressione, that they independently came up with two things very similar in nature to each other, right? So do you think that, I mean, obviously you don't. What would you say to people who say that influence flowed only from Felix to his older sister who started composing before he did?
Yeah, I mean, it's not informed by reality or any there's no factual basis in that at all. So I just don't listen to people who take that position, and there's plenty of them on the internet, and I absolutely do not have time for that. So there's plenty of evidence for them collaborate. I mean, we have most of their letters survived. I don't think that Felix's letters survived. I think maybe his wife burned them after he died. I don't know. But we have many, many letters between Fanny and Felix, and a lot of them are them reviewing each other's work and giving criticism, giving feedback. I've been working a lot on the string quartet recently, so that comes to mind. But she sent Fanny sent Felix the string quartet. He wrote back with his feedback, which was very critical. I think unnecessarily critical, but also in line with his kind of more, not neoclassical, but like a more conservative approach to form and harmonic structure and everything. But he did write some suggestion, and she revised. You can see in her notebook she revised it significantly after she got that letter. And so you can look at that's an example, obviously, of her, taking feedback from Felix. But the same thing happened in the other direction, and she went to many of Felix's performances of Felix's work, even when he wasn't there. And the St. Matthew Passion, obviously, is what he's so famous for. He was only there for, I think, the first performance or two of that, and then he had to leave town to do some other music stuff, and Fanny went to the following. I think they did one for Easter and one for Bach's birthday, and whichever the second one was, Fanny went to it, and she gave him a full report of the performance, saying the baritone was a beat late on this note, and the trumpets were flat on this note. Like she was just as into his music. She knew his music just as well. She'd give him feedback. He'd revise things. And that went on, like you said, a little bit less as they got older and kind of went a little bit their own ways. But especially when they were kids, there's a lot of that kind of editorial support going both ways. And we have evidence of it in the manuscripts and in letters. And yeah, I mean, it's just a fact.
Yeah, I mean, it's ignorant at best and delusional at worst to claim
Exactly.
that the street flowed one way, right?
I love that.
Especially
Yes.
we know that as how much of his style came from the feedback that, I mean, because he would just take all of her when he was a young child, he would just take all of her suggestions on his pieces, and how much of who he became is a result of their collaboration at that age and as they grew. So the Mendelssohn style, you know, it's interesting to try to cast her on her own as Hensel, but also the Mendelssohn style. I mean, it's shared. It is a collaborative creation, and to say that it belongs to him or alone is like it's just not rooted in fact. Yeah. I wanted to talk more about Das Jahr because it is her biggest work, and you know, I think that it is the best shot at sharing her legacy, right? Because it dispels so much of her criticisms, right? We know that they were separate at that point. Very, you know, they still wrote letters and shared music, but they were very artistically separate at that stage of her life. And it was her project, right? So Das Jahr, as an hour-long cycle comprising of 12 pieces plus a postlude to cap off the end of the year, is groundbreaking. It was groundbreaking, and it had never been done quite that way before, right? We had the seasons, Vivaldi, obviously, but she has the distinction of having the first piano cycle with a piece for every month of the year, and she didn't publish it. What do you think the reactions might have been if she had published?
Oh, wow. I really don't know. I wonder what they would have been. I mean, it's such a ambitious piece in its scope, right? I mean, there were other piano cycles around this time, right? Like, especially think of like Robert Schumann, and there were other piano cycles happening around this time, but like the scale of this and what's really impressive is the interconnectedness of all of the movements. And I mean, my favorite example is January, right? January has you can hear little themes from each of the rest of the movements that are to come in the rest of the year in January. And January is called a dream. So it's almost, you know, there's this, it's programmatic in a way that, you know, not all of the movements are programmatic, but especially we see the second edition she made so she wrote it in 1841. She gave it to her husband as a Christmas present. And then in 1842, the two of them made the fair copy of it, which is rightfully, I think, one of the more famous projects that she did, which is, you know, she wrote out engraved it again in by hand in you know, beautiful colored paper, and then her husband Wilhelm, who was an artist, painted or drew a vignette on the first page of each piece, and that gives us a little more of an idea of what's happening in each piece, what each piece is about. And then the two of them together, they chose the excerpts from poetry to evoke kind of the mood of each piece and each month. But you can see, you know, the September, for example, September does have a subtitle. It says "At the River," and you can hear kind of the flowing of the river. And then the illustration is a woman with her toes in the river. So it's programmatic in that you can hear scenes happening. You can hear some parts of the story, but it's also so interconnected. The way we go, the sequence of different keys over the course of the hour, and where we end up, and how the themes are connected to each other. It's just it's a monumental work, and it's deserved to be studied more. I think that there have been more people working on that. There's a few, you know, dissertations and like deep analyses of it, but I think, you know, what I'd like to see more of, and there's starting to be more of, is we need more analysis of her music, right? Like this, since women composers are getting a little bit more attention, recently, and it's so good to see other, like, the Florence Price, like, renaissance that we're living in right now. That's so encouraging, and like it's fantastic. And I think it needs to start, like you were talking before about this cycle, right? Like you need to interrupt the cycle somewhere by, like, you need to know about it in order to look for it, in order for it to be there for the next person to look for it, right? Like this cycle needs to happen, and part of that cycle is telling the stories of these composers that have been not recognized enough. And a lot of them have fantastic stories. Like, Fanny Hensel has a fantastic life, had so many interesting things happen to her. She was a brilliant lady. And, all of, Amy Beach, Florence Price, Margaret Bonds, right? All of these composers had a fantastic story, and that's important, but we need to move past that because we need the same kind of like analysis of the music that you get for all of the other, canon composers, in order that's part of getting them to be taken seriously and studied in the same way. Because a lot of people will look at works by music or music by women and say, oh, it's fine, it's a cute little song, it's a nice little song. But if there's not enough analysis to prove, like, no, there's something here you need to look at and you need to study and you need to understand, it stays at this surface level. It stays like, oh, this is a nice, I'll make sure I play one thing by a woman or whatever, and it's still, there's still this separation of their work as something other than what it is, which is, complex, nuanced, worthy of detailed analysis. So that's kind of where I've been recently as I've been doing more arrangements and really thinking, I've been doing a lot more of that analysis now that I'm working more on arranging and less on just transcribing things. And it's such a rewarding experience because there's so many interesting things happening harmonically, structurally, that the stories about the lives of these women is fantastic, but we need more than that.
Absolutely. I think about what legacy Daciar would have if it was published under Felix's name, right? Oh, yeah. If it was something that he published towards the end of his life and it had, it was performed and it received acclaim, I feel like it would be performed all the time. It would be one of the pieces of romantic piano literature, right? Because of its scale and just the complexity of it. And, there's so many different ways we could talk about this. People say that the end game for feminist history is that you don't need a women composer class, right? You don't need women composer books. You don't need that kind of stuff. You just have history books. You have history classes, and women are included in their rightful place, right? But until that point, it's important that we push for the inclusion of these women. I mean, December is my favorite all-time piano piece ever, and it's such a masterful. It's so good with musical storytelling, right? It's such a, like, if I think of the great romantic pieces that tell stories like Earl Koenig and the kid dies at the end, with December, and you think, well, there's this part where they're in church, right? They're in church, and then she uses this beautiful display of intertextuality to bring this piece that everybody sung in Germany at Christmas time. And, the little musical people, they go into the church, and then afterwards we hear the church bells, and it's Christmas Day. And, depending on either, if you take the coda from the original December, you have this big bombastic virtuosic display where she then repeats the
chorale,
the chorale again. And then in March, it happens again. She has an Easter song in the March song. So it's just, there's so much great analysis to be done, and it deserves to be held up as this shining example of it's a masterful character piece set. It should have been brought up during the character piece portion of every music literature class, because it's just, how can you not?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. It's such the way you framed, what if it was published under Felix's name? I mean, we would, because, Felix gets, I think, an unfair, because he wasn't quite as showy and as weird as some of the like later romantic composers that he knew, right, that were maybe a few years younger than him. He gets a rap as like a little bit more conservative structurally, like emotionally. He doesn't kind of let loose the way that Fanny does, right, musically. If he published Dacier under his name at the end of his life, we would point to it as one of the he had been a great composer until then, and then he wrote this, and this was like his magnum opus, crowning achievement, the greatest thing that ever happened in Western classical music, especially because of where he had come from before then, because of how adventurous it is as a piece. That's really interesting. It's a really interesting idea. What would happen
because it would be talked about, right? It would be performed. It would be huge, right? It would be so much bigger than it is now. You'd have so many different editions, and you'd have all of this different commentary on it, and it wouldn't be like one recording on YouTube, right? Or a handful of professional recordings done of it. It would be performed all the time, and
you take a class on it in your introduction to piano music class in college.
Yeah, it would get an entire couple of weeks in a track. It would be huge, right? Yeah. I mean, you can spend so much time just exploring this massive work. And I think it's interesting because if other composers, male composers, who were allowed to explore large forms, their large aspirations were set in large forms, like the symphony, and they were operas for storytelling, and Fanny was limited to one instrument for so much of what she did, right? And so Dacier, I think, was born out of the restrictions that she faced as a woman in the 1800s. She wasn't able to set her sights on these large scale works, so she was forced to really go beyond what other people were doing on the piano.
Yeah, she had to find that scale and drama and intensity all on the piano without access to these larger forms, like you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And that just it forced her to be creative, and it forced her to really dig deep and push the limits of what her instrument could do in the 1800s. So it's really, I think it's a remarkable achievement. And I never understood what feminist music historians were talking about when they talked about the women of the music of women can't be examined through the same exact lens that we examine male music through, right? We can't apply the same point of reference for what women were doing at the time with what men were doing, because they couldn't do the same things. They couldn't do the same things. They didn't have access to the same education. And, I think that it is just such an important touchstone in the discussion of women classical composers, because it just flies in the face of so much what they said. Some professors have said that I don't teach the music of women to undergrad students because they need to know the great composers, or I don't teach the music of women because they didn't have the same socioeconomical opportunities and they're not as good at composing as their male counterparts, or there's just pedagogical pieces that teach certain things the best and I need to use those pieces. By the way, they all happen to be written by men, right? It's, there's all of these points, and they need to be refuted over and over and over. And the work you're doing at making this music accessible, just it's transformative. You're doing incredible work with Hensel pushers. And I did not get the pencil pushers joke until you pointed it out.
Well, especially if you pronounce it the German way, it's Hensel, not Hensel. Anyway, I just needed a URL to put the site on. I mean, thank you. I do it because I love doing it. I mean, I really like I'm fascinated by her music. I like doing the kind of the tedious parts of just entering things into PDFs and because it gives me a chance to get really familiar with what she's doing and just get to learn all of her pieces, which I really think they're all fantastic. I mean, obviously, some of that she wrote some like little exercises when she was 14 that aren't the most impressive thing that she wrote, right? But that's another thing is we're judging her music by what's on my side is literally everything she ever wrote. And, a lot of Canon composers we think about, like, they would burn, I think about Brahms would burn entire opuses that he was going to publish and wasn't happy with and didn't like, right? So he was super selective about like the music that was going to represent who he was as a composer. Fanny Hensel doesn't have that because if you pick up something by her and you read it and you go, oh, well, this isn't very good. It's like, well, yeah, not every single thing everyone wrote is good. I don't think any of it is bad, honestly. I think it's even the stuff you look at she wrote when she was 15, 16 years old is, I think, very impressive. But, I think what you were saying about we have to judge women composers, but, you have to look at it through a different lens. I think that's a part of it too, right? Is I hear what you're saying that you have to it's both yes and no. It's yes, you do have to look at it through a different lens, and also you don't have to, because she does have these great works that you can point to, like Daciar and like her string quartet that you don't need to make apologies for and use a different a different set of measurements to compare it to the great composers. But she wrote so many things that are so fantastic, and I love being able to spend my free time exploring that and sharing it with other people, and if it helps other people have access to this music, that's the goal. And what I'm really hoping for now, I mean, now that I've done most of the tedious work of getting, I mean, there's still some choral pieces I need to get up, but most of the solo piano originals up there. Doing the arranging is something I really like. And a lot of the arranging I had done before I finished this project with people would ask for critical edition. So like you said, most of my stuff is text, but some people do want critical editions. I've made a few like custom critical editions for people, or people who want an arrangement for a specific instrument or a specific difficulty level. Like I've been doing that for the last couple of years, and I really like that work. And being familiar with her entire body of work allows me to do that better. If I know, I'm not certainly not, don't know all of them off the top of my head, but knowing, which of her lieder would work really well as a piece for, a trio for piano, cello, and flute, for example, right? Like having a sense of what is there to work with allows me to be creative in doing the part that I really like, which is now more of the arranging critical edition type stuff.
And that's wonderful. I think the work that you're doing is fantastic. Have you thought of doing, all over theory books, like for kids, they have these games and these stories, one of the most common, most popular method books, they have a note on the staff and there's a letter that needs to be filled in to tell a story about a composer. But all of the composers happen, of course, to be Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn, Vivaldi. They're all the male great composers. Have you ever thought of doing a project that's a little bit further away from the score, where you are designing things to help tell the story of Fanny Mendelssohn's life to young piano students?
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. I had originally thought of doing, the closest I come to that was, when I did the easy piano arrangement of Daciar, there's two books, and you can buy just the music book, which is just the simple arrangement. Each one I think is, it's 2 pages. It's very short. They're each maybe like 30 seconds, less than a minute long for young learners especially. But then the second book is a lesson book. I made a lesson book because I realized, as you've probably noticed going through Daciar, is like, this is it's such a great, if it weren't so virtuosic, it'd be great for teaching, because you explore so many of these different techniques and, just musical ideas. So I realized, that, there's certain rhythmic patterns. I think, October has this persistent like rhythmic pattern that is great for practicing, like I dotted 8/16 rhythms, for example, or something. And so and another one, the contrast, I think April, maybe the contrast between slurs and staccato and, legato and staccato. And so I realized like there's so much you could do here. So the lesson book for Daciar really does touch on some of the more pedagogical stuff. I don't teach any of the theory. It's more just focused on the technique, and also a little bit of like hints of how to focus on like interpreting a piece, because I think that's something that doesn't get brought in young enough for new learners, for people. I mean, even adults who are beginners, but for young learners, right? It's really just about making it to the end of the piece a lot of the time, and it's not about, okay, what's the mood I want to create with this? What's the story I want to tell, right? That's thought of as some like higher level thing too often. So I wanted to bring that in too. So that's part of it also. But when I was doing that, I thought, I wanted to continue. So I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to structure the upcoming easy piano arrangements, but I would love, and maybe I would need your help to do this, but love to have a more targeted levels, to really like dial in, like this is late beginner, this is, early intermediate, this is late intermediate, like really dial in the levels a little more specifically, because the easy Daciar is it gets progressively harder, but it's not, it's kind of loose, in terms of the exact level that it is technically for learners. And I would love to do some, a series of, maybe 2 or 3 books more targeted at specific difficulty levels. And I love your idea of focusing on telling the story as much as familiarizing with the music. I think that there's a huge market for that. There's a few really good resources. I know Piano Music She Wrote, which is an incredible YouTube channel and resource. They have a series of, I think they have late beginner and early intermediate books. Some of them are original works by women, and some of them are arrangements of works by women, but those are all pieces by women, focused on that early piano education, those levels. And, there's a handful here and there, but there's so much more work needed for piano learners by women, and not just, like we were talking about before, like the unrecognized, theory and method books that, that you don't have the composer's name front and center. We need works by women, recognizable women of history, and presented at levels so that, I try to imagine what would I, as a 9-year-old, how would I have reacted to performing works by women? I would have loved it. And I think you get a lot of, it took a while to drive me out of the traditional like classical music track. I think I was 18 or 17 when I got kind of pushed out of it. But I know there's a lot of girls who, maybe have less of a tolerance than I do, for better, for worse, for putting up with exclusively hearing the stories of the great white men. Like, I think that you can be more inclusive, and you can keep a lot of those learners interested in music a lot longer if you show them music that speaks to them. And right now, can we really be surprised when a lot of our, 13, 14-year-old piano students are like not interested in playing stuff by Haydn for the rest of their life? Like, we have to have more variety for them. And this is only one way to do it, but this is my little piece of it. And I know there's other people doing other, doing great work on other composers. The copyright issue is another big problem here, right? Like, fortunately, the works that I'm working on are all written about 200 years ago, so I can make these additions, and I don't have to worry about that. But a lot of, what I would like there to be more of is especially works by like Black women composers, right? And there is this renaissance happening right now of appreciating and, symphonies and other professional organizations performing more works by Black women composers. But those are still under copyright, right? Because a lot of them, obviously Black women weren't able to start doing music as a profession until the 20th century. And so a lot of that stuff is still under copyright. So there's all these, there's all these barriers. And I think that we just need to be creative about how to get around those boundaries. And I'm not suggesting, breaking copyright or anything like that, but we need creative solutions, and there's not any money in it. Sorry, I lose money every year doing Hensel pushers, but you gotta start somewhere.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that you're talking about. I love the piano music she wrote, that resource, and I think I would love to collaborate with you, and feel like there's so much that we weren't able to get to in this episode here. So maybe when you have something else launching like this book that you're talking about, we can have you back on, and we can continue the conversation. But we need to start wrapping up, unfortunately. So let's see if we can tie this up in a neat bow somehow here. I'm
not good at that. I ramble so much, so I'm not good at tying it up. This is going to be you, I think.
Let's see if I can pull it off. Short version. Let's see. Fanny Hensel is a fantastic composer, and you are doing this wonderful work at making her music more accessible. But you are doing your part to break the cycle, and everyone else needs to do their part. You are making her music more accessible. It is now up to everybody else to teach her music, to perform her music, and to bring her music into the spotlight like it's so richly deserves to be, right? So you have made it accessible, and now it's up to the teachers and the performers to take the next step. You're also doing this wonderful work at making it accessible to a younger audience. I'm so excited to see what you create and what you come up with in that vein, because so many of our young piano students are also little girls, right? It's my studio anyway. It's very, very unbalanced. And I know that so many pianists are girls. Like in my program, in school, and at college, the master's program is mostly women, right? So we need to be able to teach young girls that they can also be composers, right? Because when you teach them music written by women for, like pedagogical pieces, and then you get to the real music with some heavy air quotes, and all of that's written by men, you're teaching them something. You're teaching them that they can never hope to get far, because once the chips are down, once the cards are down, you are not going to be one of the truly remarkable people, because that's just not a thing that women can do. So it is so great that we be able to teach these young girls that they can aspire to greatness, and that we teach them about these women throughout history, that despite their circumstances, despite the internalized misogyny that was, just drummed into them every day and by everybody in society. I mean, not to get off topic here, but it's so sad, when like she says something in her journal where she's like, I'm just a woman, so I can never do that. It's so sad to read that. But despite the culture and just all of the restrictions and disadvantages that these people were placed, they still managed to create beautiful music and remarkable creations. And the work you're doing to help bring that to light is incredible. So if you're out there and you're listening, what can I do to help change this? Well, go check out henselpushers.org, and you can find literally all of her piano music. It's all accessible. It's all in a high quality PDF. None of that scanned score from the 1890s on IMSLP where it's crooked and, there's a coffee stain in the middle of the page, right? High quality.
Someone else's wrong fingerings.
Yeah, someone else's fingerings are written in there. No, none of that. We have a high quality PDFs. And then why don't you go out there and support Molly and get some of her books for, her dossier arranged for easier piano, and we'll have her back on when she has, some more of these pieces targeted towards younger learners, and we can help support the incredible work that you're doing, Molly.
That was perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on, and I will see you all next time for the next episode of the Piano Pedagogy Podcast.